This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Khanam.
And I'm Jamal Dajani.
Jamal, despite the genocide in Gaza with over 40,000 Palestinian civilians being murdered by the Israeli military, Israel continues to upgrade its atrocities against Palestinians by invading the West Bank, and specifically the towns of Jenin, Tulkarm, and some refugee camps in the West Bank, completely shutting down these towns, killing Palestinian civilians, and wreaking havoc on Palestinian civilians in the West Bank. It's an all-out war in Palestine, Jamal, against Palestinians wherever they live. We're going to be covering all of those stories today on Arab Talk. There are a number of stories that we'll be covering, especially regarding the political climate right now, Jamal. Vice President Harris, in an exclusive interview, redeclared her commitment to arming Israel despite its genocide in Gaza right now. And despite her commitment to international law, you know, Jamal, she's been advertising herself as a prosecutor committed to the rule of law. I guess it's the rule of law except for Israel. We'll also be discussing the uncommitted voters when it comes to the Democratic Party. Will they remain uncommitted as the election approaches? We'll also be talking about the infamous Leahy Act, which forbids U.S. weapons being used when they're being used against civilians. Yet the United States, despite the Leahy law, continues to send weapons to Israel, and they continue to kill civilians. We're going to be talking about a viral suicide note, Jamal, from an so-called Israeli survivor that went viral after October 7th. It turns out that particular suicide note turned out to be a hoax. And as I spoke about earlier, Jamal, will be covering the most recent uptick in violence in the West Bank. So we have a lot to cover today on Arab Talk.
Yeah, a lot of stories, Jess, and we'll start with the story. I think it's a big story because this was Vice President Kamala Harris's second opportunity to kind of outreach to the uncommitted voters, to Palestinian Americans, to Arab Americans, but she refuses basically to change course on U.S. complicity with Israel's genocide in Gaza. So in a CNN interview, she basically was echoing Biden's rhetoric, calling for a ceasefire while dodging the reality that the U.S. government could force one by implementing an arms embargo on Israel. I mean, she acts like she has no control over the ceasefire. Like we keep negotiating. She says the president and I are hard working, on implementing a ceasefire or reaching an agreement and so forth. And then, of course, when she gets asked about the most important question, which is basically, will you hold armed shipments, since there is a genocide, since there is basically 40,000 people. I'm not using the words of Dana Bash, but I'm explaining what's going on.
Right.
And she refuses. She basically repeats the same rhetoric, and she says, this is actually her quote, and she says, "Let me be clear, I'm unequivocal and unwavering in my commitment to Israel's defense and its ability to defend itself, and that's not gonna change." And then she talks about the 1,200 people, Israelis who have been massacred. She uses the word massacred, and many young people who were massacred, who are simply attending a music festival. She also repeats something that has been debunked, and we'll talk about that. Women were horribly raped, okay? And when, in fact, just less than 2 weeks ago, there were a video of Israeli soldiers raping Palestinian detainees, and many others also reported of being raped not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. So then she goes on to say, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Now, look at the difference in language. Israelis were massacred, and she talks about the 40,000 plus Palestinians who have been massacred in a genocide. She kind of like says, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed, and we have got to get a deal done. We were in Doha. We have to get a deal done. This war must end. And that's kind of nonsensical things that she keeps repeating when she had an opportunity to basically bridge the gap, or at least, explain the big, I would say, snafu that the Democratic Party committed in the convention by not allowing a Palestinian American, and in fact a Palestinian American lawmaker to speak for 2 minutes.
But Jamal, why are people so delusional about the Democrats? Why are people in denial about Kamala Harris? Why do people still believe this kind of delusional idea that somehow Kamala Harris is different from Biden, or that the Harris administration will be different from the Biden-Harris administration when it comes to their unwavering support of genocide, unwavering support of Israel, and a continued arms kind of uninterrupted train of 2,000-pound, 500-pound bomb weapons that they're sending to Israel that are killing Palestinian civilians. Let's be clear, Jamal, there is no daylight between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Kamala Harris is a committed Zionist, just like Joe Biden. There will be no change in policy under the Harris administration if she wins. But yet the Harris administration, in their rhetoric at the DNC and their rhetoric to Arab Americans, because they know that there's a big risk here with alienating Arab Americans and Muslim Americans and progressives, they keep saying these things, Jamal, which lead one to suspect that maybe she'll have a different approach toward Israel. After the Dana Bash interview on CNN, it couldn't be any clearer that Kamala Harris is committed to genocide and committed to the United States supporting the criminal activities of the government of Israel. Let me ask you, is there any doubt in your mind that Kamala Harris will be any different, won't be any different than Joe Biden? There's no difference. Do you see any?
No, she made it very clear. And huge U.S. shipments of weapons and bombs to Israel keep allowing it to massacre and starve Palestinian civilians of all ages. And we'll talk about this later on, while violating federal statutes as well as international law. Just listen, just like a few days ago, Biden approved, and that's the Biden-Harris administration, approved sending arms to Israel worth upwards of $20 billion. I love how they portray this. They say these transfers were called sales, like the American taxpayer is making money out of these sales. Of course, they fail to mention the U.S. aid to Israel, which Israel uses much of the military aid that Congress approves out of U.S. taxpayers' money, basically as a gift card, like we give a blank check, or like how an average person goes and buys $100 gift card for Macy's, but we give them a gift card to buy U.S.-made weapons back from the United States. These, 1,000-pound bombs or 4,000-pound bombs to drop on Palestinians, not only in Gaza. They've been using these bombs to blow up entire neighborhoods in Jenin and Tulkarem. And we'll talk about this in a few minutes. And that's no one is kind of talking about this, what's going on in the West Bank now. Over 600 people basically have been killed.
Have been killed.
Yeah, it's
but the thing that I find particularly kind of egregious and kind of just like beyond the pale, Jamal, is the way that Kamala Harris is packaging herself to the middle by saying she's going to be tough on crime, she's going to uphold law, she's a prosecutor, she's tough on the border. All of this bogus rhetoric about how she will adhere to the rule of law. You would, in hearing that kind of rhetoric about her being so tough and using the law to enforce, really being strict on these issues, is morally so bankrupt and laughable when you see what she's saying about Israel. Let's be clear, Jamal. Israel is a criminal enterprise. They have been found by the ICJ with credible evidence of committing genocide and are being investigated. The ICJ has also determined that Israel is illegally occupying the West Bank of Palestine and Jerusalem. So we have this illegal criminal enterprise called Israel. And Kamala Harris wants to uphold her position as a prosecutor upholding the rule of law. Here we go again, Jamal, with the Palestine exception. She will uphold the rule of law except when it comes to the killing of Palestinians and the genocide in Gaza. I wonder how this is really going to cost her in November, Jamal, because do you think uncommitted voters and progressives are really going to believe Kamala Harris anymore, especially after that CNN interview?
I don't think so. And listen, first of all, she touts herself as a former prosecutor. And I just want to go back to something you've mentioned about being tough on law. Why doesn't she implement the Leahy law? And we'll talk about that next. Why doesn't she implement? It's very simple. It's right there in front of her. Not only it's not only a law, but it's also named after a senator. She was also a senator, so no doubt that she is very familiar with the Leahy law, which we will talk about. Now talking about the uncommitted voters, I have a big question because that's actually very important. Will the uncommitted voters remain uncommitted? Meaning, when it comes to basically in a month, because early voting begins in October, and especially in the key swing states like Michigan, where Donald Trump won by only 10,000 votes in 2016, and more than 100,000 people cast their ballot for the uncommitted, and the total, this is just in Michigan alone, but around the country, more than 650,000, some figures put it at 800,000 in the U.S. cast a protest ballot against Biden over his support for the war in Gaza. Now, there is two things that are happening now, okay? Because I've been monitoring this very carefully. Kamala Harris now has an Egyptian Arab American outreach person trying to dialogue with the Arab American community, especially in places like Michigan, Chicago, and elsewhere. And at the same time, now there is a growing movement, an offshoot of this uncommitted vote, which started as before as abandoned Biden. Now it's the abandoned Harris. These are, I would say, more of the die-hard uncommitted segment of this movement, who are saying no matter what, just abandon her. And that kind of answers your question. These guys are not going to vote for her. They're going to vote.
Of course not.
They're going to vote for the Green Party or Cornel West, and they're not going to vote. And they're saying we are going. I've been listening to them. I've been monitoring what they've been posting on Twitter and elsewhere, and they're saying no, we're not going to sit at home. Doesn't mean we are uncommitted and we're going to sit at home, but we will vote. Some say we will vote for Jill Stein. Others will say we will vote for Cornel West. But then you have the soft segment of the uncommitted. And,
Right.
because you have to listen to this, because I've seen what they've been writing, and they're saying that, well, she's better than Biden. At least she has empathy. That's what they're saying. Okay, don't question me, but at least she has empathy, and Trump is going to be worse. I mean, this is the message they're saying. Trump is going to deport minorities, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans. He's anti-immigrants. He's anti-this, anti-that. And therefore, we have to give her a chance, because once she gets into the White House, she'll change. And my question, did Obama change when he went to the White House?
He didn't. It's
Has
the same
anyone changed when it came to the issue of Israel and Palestine? And so I call them the delusional segment of the population. So I'm asking you, I mean, with this kind of thing, does this worry you, that if they're sitting now on the fence, that when it comes to November or October, since early voting, that they will say, well, we are more scared from former President Trump, therefore we're going to vote for Harris?
Yeah, Jamal, I think if people have been listening to Arab Talk and listening to us speak the last number of months, they will realize that what we've been trying to say is that this is a 2008 redo or redux. This is old wine in new bottles. This is the same rhetoric that we have heard before. We heard it from Obama, who had the so-called empathy for Palestinians and for dispossessed people and for folks of color. Yet we did find that the Obama administration's policy on Israel was no different. And now we're hearing the same kind of rhetoric from Kamala Harris, who is intimately involved in the Biden administration's policy in Palestine and intimately involved in the policy in sending weapons to kill civilians and intimately involved in the genocide. And the idea that somehow she has empathy is actually, for me, Jamal, more dangerous. She has empathy, yet she's still willing to send bombs. What kind of psychopath, what kind of individual who has empathy for Palestinians, which I don't believe she does, but let's say she does, what kind of psychopath has empathy for a person but continues to create the conditions that will allow civilian children, Palestinian children, to be murdered, to get polio, to be denied access to health care, and now, shut down the West Bank? I think it's completely bogus. And I do believe you're right, Jamal. These uncommitted voters, these people who really see Kamala Harris for what she is, as a tool for the Democratic Party, are not going to vote for her. And the so-called people who see her as somehow worse than Trump are also deluding themselves completely. And there will be a reckoning in November, Jamal, because I really believe that we're seeing the ghost of Hillary again, from 2016, right? Where everybody thought she was way ahead of Trump. And the Democrats are already dancing in the streets, Jamal. Here we go. And yet the race is incredibly close, despite Trump and J.D. Vance making all these mistakes. It's an incredibly close race.
I don't think, to tell you the truth, and maybe I might be wrong, but I don't think it's going to be that close. I mean, of course, in American elections, you don't have those big margins, somebody winning by 80%. It's going to be 51, 49, 52%, and so forth. But I think she has a lot of problems. And I'm not only talking about just like what happened at the convention or her position on the genocide that's happening in Gaza, but there is a lot of chatter, like about how did she catapulted herself in front of everybody else. A lot of people question about this democratic process. And I think a lot of the politicians, she didn't go through, any vetting, or she didn't go through the whole process of nomination and whatever. And all of a sudden,
she's the nominee. Yeah.
She's the nominee. People actually are worried about that. People are questioning this, and people look at her record or at her popularity before, when she dropped out of the race, when she didn't even reach 8%, less than that. She was like polled very poorly. And all of a sudden now, I think there is this whole invention. It's almost like a movie, just like Hollywood inventing her all over again, because the Democrats are so desperate, especially when basically President Biden imploded in the first debate, or in the only debate with Trump. And then in a panic, they had to put her because they were running out of time. And they're making this like everybody, oh, she's so great, and she is this, and she is that. We didn't hear that before. And literally by celebrities coming forward. If you watch the whole Democratic convention, bringing all these, the Obamas are there, the Clintons are there, everybody's there, singing praises of her, and all of a sudden she's their star, when a few months ago she wasn't. When last elections she wasn't. And I think a lot of people are revisiting this thing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Jamal. We have to understand that the DNC is really a Hollywood production. It's a production to package Kamala Harris and Vice President nominee Walz, is to package them as this kind of couple, right? This kind of so-called couple that's going to help America again go back to its roots and to its values of, justice for all. And it's a big tent and all of this rhetoric. But I think you point out a really important point, which was Kamala Harris as a vice president was had extremely low numbers in terms of how people perceived her when she was vice president.
She was invisible.
Remember that. Right. And nobody really knew. She really didn't do much. She was given all these portfolios. One of her portfolios was the, quote, border and immigration. That turned out to be a disaster. We see her flip-flopping on immigration. We see her flip-flopping on other policy issues. But the biggest, as we've been pointing out, Jamal, the biggest insult is the so-called empathy for Palestinians. I want to be really clear with our listeners and viewers, Jamal. We can't say this on the air, but she doesn't give a you-know-what about Palestinians. Let's be clear about it. She doesn't care. She's going to support the Biden Zionist agenda of sending arms to Israel to kill Palestinian civilians. And if any voter believes otherwise, they've drank the Kool-Aid. They drank the Kool-Aid in believing this Hollywood production of Kamala Harris, because she's really not telling us much. The CNN interview, Jamal, really was revealing, because she didn't really say that much, except for Israel. She's diehard committed to it. But she really didn't fully describe why she is flip-flopped on so many other issues. Now she's a tough prosecutor. Before that, she was a progressive, Jamal. Well, my question to you is, who is Kamala Harris? I think we know. She's committed to this criminal enterprise called Israel. She's committed to them.
Well, listen, I want to talk about something you mentioned earlier, because you compared her to Hillary Clinton, and you compared what happened to Hillary Clinton to what's going to happen to her. And you're 100% correct. Hillary Clinton refused to bring in the so-called large tent of hers. That's right. What the Democrats like to tout. The Bernie people, the progressive segment. And it's the same thing with her now. She's refusing to recognize that there is a large movement that rejects a genocide in Gaza. And with her last interview, she totally kind of turned them off, and they're not going to vote for her.
Right.
That's where I see that comparison, and there is also a sense of arrogance in this, because that's the same thing. Hillary Clinton thought that she was a shoo-in, and you know what? Even with all her faults and lack of popularity, Kamala Harris should be also a shoo-in, running against someone who is a felon, with, I don't know the number of convictions. I lost track of that he has. It should be a simple formula, but she is not popular. And I have a trivia for you. And this is also important, because I don't want to also just frame this whole thing about Gaza with her, which is very important. But guess what? How many sitting VPs were elected president? I'm talking sitting VPs were elected president in the whole history of the United States, Jess. Do you know the number?
I think it's only one.
It's actually two.
I think.
It's actually two.
Okay, two. I think Nixon and Bush.
No. Sitting, meaning right after the term.
Sitting.
No, yeah, right after
then
the
it's only
term.
Bush. I only know Bush.
Yes.
Who else?
So George Herbert Walker Bush Senior, came right after Ronald Reagan. But and I'll reveal the second one. But here is something to remind people, because this is more of our history. The other one is from the 1800s, Jess. It's Van Buren, okay? I can't remember the year, but that's the only other sitting or serving VP who won right after. And we can talk about him, because I don't have too many details about the whole history of Van Buren, but I know that at least he that's it. This is the number. But Bush Senior came after a very, 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 very popular president, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was very popular. Like him or you don't like him, but when he had his 8 years, he was popular. At least that's what the perception of him at the time, that he was a very popular president. And that's in our history, or our modern history, let's say, we've witnessed one. So she has a very difficult mountain to climb. I mean, Biden is not popular, and Biden hasn't served 2 terms. Ronald Reagan was embedded in the memory of the Americans. He was there for 8 years and a lot of achievements. He could talk about the Iran hostage crisis, that kind of how he defeated Carter with. He can talk about perestroika and the fall of the Berlin Wall and other things. What does Biden has to show for? We've lost soldiers in Afghanistan. Was a horrible defeat under his leadership, and she's going to be reminded of this. A lot of the veterans remember that, right?
I think that's really a really good analysis, Jamal. And I think that the way the media is portraying it is that she's walking a fine line between, her commitment and fidelity to Biden and the Biden administration, which she is intimately part of, while charting her own ground. That's the media construction of Kamala Harris. But in reality, as we've been saying now, is that there really is no distance between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and the two administrations. There really isn't. And if there isn't any distance, then she is, in fact, as you say, in real trouble, because Biden is not popular. The economy is not great for a lot of Americans, despite, the packaging of, interest rates coming down, the economy is strong. People don't feel it. And it doesn't matter what the numbers say, Jamal. It matters what people feel, and people don't feel it. The Biden policy about so many things. Afghanistan is a really great example. That was a complete disaster. And let's not forget, Jamal, that the world is on fire. I mean, look at the US policy in Ukraine with Russia, with China. Everything is completely unstable now because of the so-called Biden Harris administration. But it seems like people are forgetting this, Jamal, because the way Kamala Harris is packaged on TV, she's upbeat, she laughs a lot, she's optimistic. It is so delusional that they are packaging her this way and forgetting the real facts on the ground about who this person is, what her policies are about, and what she represents. And I think as we get closer to November, Jamal, all of those realities will come into focus. And, you know, I completely agree with you. It is not looking good. And yet the Democrats are dancing in the street. What's the saying, Jamal? I mean, the Democrats are already dancing on the grave of Donald Trump, and he's still alive.
Well, that's why, I mean, these examples basically just basically reiterate the fact that she needs every single vote. She cannot alienate people. And she is repeating Hillary Clinton's mistakes.
Absolutely.
And that's the big thing. And those are the challenges. Those are her challenges, to be getting re-elected after, really, in my opinion, a failed administration. The Biden administration is a failed administration. And distancing herself, not to repeat the same slogans that Biden says. And the other thing is to really, show that she could lead. We have an issue. We have a major issue. We have the economy. We have the border. We have, like you've mentioned, the world is really on fire. I mean, we could be on, we could face World War III if we continue supplying Ukraine with weapons and allow Benjamin Netanyahu to basically his scorched earth policy in the Middle East. I don't know if we avoided the confrontation with Iran, but Benjamin Netanyahu is pushing us towards a confrontation with Iran. So all these things, I don't know what is she doing about? What is she going to do about it if she follows in the footsteps of Biden?
Yeah, I think we're in trouble. Foreign policy is a disaster, Jamal, a complete disaster. And the thing that voters don't realize is that nobody really knows Kamala Harris and what she's thinking, because she really isn't giving many details about what she's thinking. And as we've pointed out multiple times today already, when she is giving details, there is no difference between Harris and Biden when it comes to the genocide in Palestine right now. There's no difference whatsoever. So if people are really genuinely happy with the United States supporting a genocide, and people are genuinely happy when they see the turmoil and the destabilization of the entire region of the Middle East, in Asia, and in other parts, and in Africa and other parts of the world, if people are really pleased with how terrible the economy is doing and how it makes people feel, then they've drank the Kool-Aid. And I think, we're going to come back to this. There's only 66 days, 67 days until the election. And you keep hearing and reading about the framing. Oh, she's ahead, the glow of the DNC, the honeymoon is still going on. It's so interesting to see and to hear how the media has jumped on the Kamala Harris bandwagon. And yeah, I don't know about you, man. We've said it a million times, but it smells like Hillary Clinton to me.
Well, if she doesn't change her basically path, because you've mentioned people don't know much about Kamala Harris. No, actually, recently we've learned more about Kamala Harris, but it's all fluff. It's all fluff. Yeah. It's not about her policies, and that's what the American public want to learn. It's not like, about her life, her personal life, and her upbringing. Every candidate presents this. This is kind of, like you said, the Hollywood production, and I, as an American, I'm very excited to have a woman president, and also, playing this identity politics also is not going to help that much, because at the end of the day, you want a leader, and you want a leader to bring stability to the economy, to bring stability to the world, to the globally, since we, as in the United States, portrays itself as the leader of the free world, and we have wars, ongoing wars. And then you have to answer the question, where is that money to funnel all that money, billions of dollars, to Ukraine and to Israel? Where is it coming from? Where is it coming from?
Well, we know where it's coming from, Jamal. It's coming from you. It's coming from me. It's coming from our viewers and listeners. It's coming from the tax burden that everybody feels. And it's not like the economy, and I'm sorry to keep coming back to this, Jamal, but you all you have to do is really speak with people. I mean, despite what you read in the mainstream media, if you actually talk to people who are trying to survive right now, and despite what Kamala Harris and Tim Walz say about the middle class, people are suffering right now. And, food prices continue to be really high, and gas prices are high, and it's hard for people to make ends meet. That's the Biden economy. Now, we're not saying that the Trump vision of the world is any better, because it's really not. All we're really saying, Jamal, is that the way Kamala Harris is being packaged is bogus. It's not connected to reality. And the idea that somehow, and you said this, and I think it was a really good point, that somehow the Democratic tent is so big. It's not that big. If you look at all the people with extreme wealth are putting money behind getting Kamala Harris, elected. The idea that this is this big, inclusive tent in the Democratic Party is really bogus. I did read kind of an interesting story about how a lot of African Americans are kind of skeptical. I mean, despite what you're reading about how, the African American vote is, solidly behind Kamala Harris. Apparently, it's not that true. When you do the polling, especially when you look at African American men, for example, she's really in a lot of trouble. So, and we know that Gen Z and millennials are kind of skeptical of Kamala Harris still, Jamal. So, I guess, as a genocide supporter, she's really in trouble.
Moving on to the next story, Jess, a suicide note that went viral.
Oh, yeah.
Went viral.
That's right.
Claiming to be from a young survivor of the Nova Music Festival. And this person, the note claims, believed to be from a young survivor at the Nova Music Festival. And this person supposedly watched the horrible attacks and rape and attacks on his girlfriend. In the note claims he couldn't take it anymore, so he committed suicide. Well, Israel's Channel 13 debunked that, basically tried to contact the author's family. This led to an investigation, which basically concluded that the story was fabricated.
Yep.
This is one of the...
What a surprise.
So the letter was posted anonymously. There's a page for the Nova Survivors. It's the Nova Survivors Facebook group. And later on was all over Twitter, was disseminated by people who have a lot of following and a lot of Hasbaristas. One of them, and then was translated, but initially it was posted in Hebrew, then translated into English and other languages. And this big Hasbarist, his name is Hen Mazik. He's on Twitter. He's basically, I assume he might be a paid Hasbarist for the Israeli government, because he works at the Tel Aviv Institute. shared the translation of the fabricated suicide note on X or Twitter with highly sensationalized remarks. And I'm quoting here what he put. After miraculously surviving the October 7 massacre, the young Israeli man decided to end his life after witnessing too many horrors, including the rape of a girl. Okay? The overwhelming weight of everything he saw, heard, and experienced, along with his inability to save the girl being assaulted nearby, made him feel incapable of continuing his life. And you should see that Twitter storm about this note and people forwarding it, so on. Millions of people read it, including it was forwarded, Jess, guess by who? By Germany's envoy to Israel.
Oh,
I mean,
no.
think about Germany's. Really? This is basically an envoy, an ambassador, and he forwarded it. And later on, he had this past week to apologize for disseminating basically fake news. And I'm reading here, I regret having believed, like so many others, that the suicide letter was real. It turns out it was fake. Ambassador Stefan Siebert posted on X. Now, the reason I bring this, because it had it's something very new, and it happened so fast with a lot of following, then it was debunked so quickly. Now, the big question is how many stories like this, including, I should remind our listeners, because Kamala Harris, and I don't want to go talk again about her, but she mentions about Israelis being raped. She doesn't talk about Palestinians being raped. Biden claimed and lied about seeing pictures of beheaded and burned babies. Nobody talks about that. Nobody's holding him accountable. She repeated the same things. They're talking about a fetus being torn from their mother, fetuses being torn from their mother's womb, and other allegations of mass rape. And what about these stories that have been debunked? Because all these allegations, guess what? They were debunked.
Fake news.
They were debunked by Israeli media. They were debunked by American journalists who did investigative reporting right here, including a recent United Nations report, which was the release, found that it was that the United Nations was unable to verify various allegations of sexual assault or violence, including those related to the kibbutz Be'eri that they keep mentioning it. And
don't forget about the New York Times, Jamal, also debunked.
Yeah, I feel these stories keep coming out, keep getting circulated every time Israel kills 10,000 more Palestinians. Now the number stands at 40,600 plus. So they come up with a new story, and they've been increasing these stories. And the most recent story, which has not been verified, which recently now 6 Israeli hostages have been found dead. And immediately the media is jumping on the bandwagon that they were killed by Hamas. And we don't know that because Israel was caught lying and then later admitted that it killed its own hostages. And they've been bombing the hell out of Gaza. So there are all kinds of different possibilities how hostages could have been killed. But regardless, it's the...
No, I mean...
also the fabrication about that the Israeli government is negotiating to release the hostages. At the end of the day, every single hostage would be alive, just like the ones who were released before, if they negotiated for their release. So everything is on Benjamin Netanyahu's stubbornness to not basically continue the negotiations in good faith. And that's why we're seeing Palestinians are getting killed, hostages are getting killed.
Well, Jamal, I mean, I think this is something you and I have been saying for months and months and months. I mean, we're now going into the 11th month of the genocide in Gaza and Palestine, Jamal. We have been saying for months that politically as well as morally, Benjamin Netanyahu does not want a ceasefire. He has never wanted a ceasefire. He has never negotiated for a ceasefire in good faith. He has lied to President Biden. He has lied to the world. And I think what we're seeing is compelling confirmation of what we've been saying for months and months, that Benjamin Netanyahu not only does not want a ceasefire, but he does not want any kind of peace. And actually, what he wants, and what if you look at the facts on the ground, and we'll get to it here when we look at what's happening in Tulkarm and in Jenin, that what he really wants is an extension of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. He wants to continue the genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. He wants to reoccupy illegally Gaza yet again. And he wants to create, and they've done this, Jamal, we just don't read about it, new settlement expansion in the West Bank, which is illegal according to the ICJ and the world community. And now they want to extend that ethnic cleansing even further in the West Bank. That's the Israeli policy that you and I have been talking about for decades now. There's no stopping it. The Biden, Harris, Netanyahu idea, like, wringing their hands. And Jamal, didn't Biden say 2 weeks ago, we're so close, and Jake Sullivan, we're so close to getting a peace deal, and people are rushing to Egypt and rushing to Doha, and we're so close. They're not close to any deal, Jamal. There's no ceasefire. There will never be a ceasefire. That's why, and again, just to go back to our first segment, this is why empathy from Kamala Harris is so insulting, because the genocide continues, the occupation continues, the destruction of Palestine continues unabated with the full support of Kamala Harris. So, all of this stuff, the fabrications, the Hasbara, it's all cover for the genocide. And, I actually think a fair number of people are beginning to see that right now for the first time. Unfortunately, it's taken 11 months for people to see that Benjamin Netanyahu does not want peace, Jamal.
No, he does not want peace. He does not want to release the hostages through negotiations. He thinks he's just going to have through force is going to successfully release them. We've seen maybe a few of them gotten released that way, but the vast majority are going to die. I mean, these hostages could have been released months ago had he accepted a ceasefire, and he has not accepted a ceasefire.
And 40,000 Palestinians wouldn't have been killed. But Jamal, I think you and I know what he wants. I mean, we already see the Hollywood ending, right? He wants Sinwar. He wants to be able to show that he killed or captured. They're not going to capture him. They're going to kill him. That he killed Sinwar, the head of Hamas in Gaza. That's his political calculation right now. He's willing to kill, as many Palestinian civilians as possible. He's willing to crush and crash the Israeli economy, which is in tatters. He's willing to basically sacrifice every hostage so that he can get his photo op with the fact that that he captured and killed Sinwar. If that's the narrative that we see unfolding right now, and the amount of blood and the amount of terror that it's going to cause and the amount of grief that's going to cause is just unspeakable, Jamal. But that's the Netanyahu plan.
And he has other plans also for the West Bank, which we'll talk about it next. Outside Gaza, and since October 7th, just more than 600 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank. Most of their stories went unreported because the focus is on Gaza. At least 20 people have been killed just recently, past three days, in Tulkarem and in Jenin, when as Israel now is conducting military raids in Jenin and besieging both Jenin and Tulkarem for the past 4 or 5 days. They've surrounded the whole town with armored vehicles. They've been destroying infrastructure, roads. You could see that
They cut the power.
They cut the power and the water. Actually, I should mention also they've been conducting raids not only in Jenin, Tulkarem, but also in Tubas. They left a trail of destruction. Everywhere they go, they leave a trail of destruction. Again, destroying infrastructure, roads, water, and electricity facilities, which basically sends the same message and the same goal, which is to make the territory inhabitable and push Palestinians out of their homes. They do that. That's what they're doing in Gaza. They're just making it inhabitable, and they're doing the same thing now in Jenin, Tubas, and Tulkarem. And the ultimate goal, if you talk to anyone who lives in the West Bank, and they'll tell you the ultimate goal involves annexing Palestinian land and ultimately, over time, getting rid of the Palestinian population and ethnically cleansing the West Bank and Gaza. I mean, this is the ultimate goal. Everybody knows that Palestinians, people ask why the Palestinians are clinging to their land. Why are they resisting? Because they know the ultimate goal. They've experienced it in 1948, and they've experienced it in 1967, and now they're experiencing it. And that's why if you talk to people in Gaza, you see them living over rubble. They're not going anywhere. So what's going to happen next? And since they're not going anywhere, Israel just drops these, 1,000-ton bombs on top of them, and that's how they are getting killed. That's why
Jamal,
we reached this number.
I have a question for you. What have you heard from the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, about the murders of Palestinian civilians in the West Bank and the ongoing illegal occupation and the extension of using U.S. weapons on civilians? Have you heard anything from Jake Sullivan, from Kamala Harris, from Antony Blinken, from Joe Biden, as the West Bank and Jerusalem are in flames right now? Have you heard anything? I'm serious. I have been looking everywhere to see if there have been any statements or anything putting any pressure on the Israeli government against its settlers, against its rogue military units, which they said they were going to put pressure on, but they withdrew that pressure from these rogue Israeli military units, Jamal. So it seems like the Biden-Harris plan, again, is to let this criminal enterprise called Israel do whatever it wants. I mean, do you see any pushback anywhere?
No. And that's what brings me back to the question that we posed earlier. What happened to the Leahy law? Why doesn't the United States force Israel to comply with the Leahy law? Why, and they continue to provide Israel with weapons and sheltering them, like what Secretary of State Antony Blinken had recently done by determining that the 4 Israeli units that had committed gross violations of human rights, how they circumvented? He said that they have taken corrective action sufficient to remediate the violation.
Yeah, look at what's happening.
So initially you want to render them ineligible for assistance, and now they're back eligible for assistance. So basically the message we're sending to Israel, and only Israel, not other countries, you could violate international laws, you could violate American laws, including the Leahy law, you could commit massacres, violate human rights, but then if you take few soldiers on the side and slap them on the wrists, then we will consider you that you have taken corrective measures, and therefore you become again eligible to receive U.S. aid, billions of dollars, and American weapons.
Well, Jamal, that's why I call Israel a criminal enterprise. I mean, they are a criminal. I don't even consider them a state under international law. They're a criminal enterprise, much like the mob. They're like a mob criminal enterprise. They get away with criminality. They hold the United States. Basically their foreign policy is held hostage by Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli, kind of elite. I mean, this is basically, literally, Jamal, they're getting away with murder. They're committing murder every day, and with the watchful support and weapons of the United States. So, the situation in Jenin and Tulkarm, Jamal, is terrible. I mean, also the refugee camps around, like Al Farah refugee camp, things like that. I mean, look at the collective punishment that Israel is engaging with. They've shut the water and the electricity off to hundreds of thousands of civilians right now. And for the last 10 or 11 months, the West Bank has been on lockdown, Jamal. So people cannot go back and forth in terms of accessing healthcare and things like that. So this criminality is being supported by the U.S. government. And again, sorry to keep bringing it back to tough on crime Kamala Harris. I guess it's a selective tough on crime prosecutor, right, Jamal? I guess it all depends.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll talk to you next week.
We'll see you next week.